So in this video, I would like to explain personal object pronouns in Russian. Object pronouns in any language replace normal nouns so that you don't have to repeat nouns in the same sentence. In English, there are the normal personal pronouns, which are I, you, he, she, it, we, informal y'all, and they. Then there are the object pronouns that replace the nouns with an object. Me, you, him, her, it, us, informal y'all, and them. Now in English, object pronouns are separated into many categories, but the biggest ones are direct and indirect object pronouns. A direct object pronoun is a person or a thing that directly receives the action or effect of the verb. Like in the sentences, he takes the gift, she drives the car, and they see the house. The nouns can be replaced with direct object pronouns, which will be he takes it, she drives it, and they see it. Other sentences can be I see you see me, we see them, and she sees us. All of these words are direct object pronouns. Indirect object pronouns are words that receive the direct object, and they can answer the questions to what and to whom, which is a very vital detail that I'll explain later. They can be used in sentences like he gives it to me, we speak to him, and I come to you. To me, to him, and you are small phrases, and they are indirect object pronouns that answer the question to whom. Indirect object pronouns in English also have other functions and answer more questions, but it will cause more confusion if I show more. So for now, I will not talk about them. Now, I showed this idea in English because Russian object pronouns will give you a different perspective on how to utilize them and in what cases they can be shown, even going as far as having the same principle in English. By the end of this video, you'd be surprised that object pronouns, both in English and Russian, are quite similar. But more importantly, Russian object pronouns get modified in the 6 Russian cases. Generally, they're not too difficult to remember because the more you understand object pronouns, the better the concept will be. First, to fully understand object pronouns in Russian, for this lesson, a reminder of the cases is needed. And in this case, I'll elaborate a bit more on the questions of the cases. The nominative answers what and who. The accusative answers what and whom, and it works with animate and inanimate objects. The dative answers to what and to whom. The genitive answers of from what and of from whom. The instrumental answers with what and with whom, and the prepositional answers in on about what and in on about whom. For this lesson, focus on the accusative and dative, because they'll make sense once we get to the English comparison of object pronouns. When compared to English, the accusative and dative are the cases that correlate to direct and indirect object pronouns as they are in English. Before showing what object pronouns look like in Russian, it is important that we first cover the cases and understand the basic idea of object pronouns in Russian. Notice how in English, I'm always saying direct and indirect because that's the system in English. But in Russian, I never say direct or indirect, and there's a big reason why. In English, object pronouns are much more categorized and specific, like direct and indirect, which makes sense because English in itself is very specific. In Russian, it's very crucial to know that you don't necessarily have the concept of direct or indirect object pronouns. The reason why is because there are cases that answer the questions for which the pronouns are responsible. Here's a different way to think about it. English has direct object pronouns, like they see it, him, her, us, and so on. All of these pronouns are direct because they receive the action of the verb. The explanation that I just gave is the simplest way to look at direct object pronouns in English. However, there's another way to identify these words, and that is by asking what and whom. By asking these questions and getting specific answers, it's possible to conclude that whatever fits the answers must be a direct object pronoun. For instance, by asking they see whom, we have an answer. They see it, him, her, or us. It, him, her, and us are direct object pronouns because they answer the questions what and whom. Now that I've just said that answering what and whom can help identify direct object pronouns, here comes a different question. Which Russian case answers the questions what and whom? It is the accusative case. Russian has the accusative case, which answers what and whom. Because English direct object pronouns can work by asking what and whom, it's safe to say that the accusative case is responsible for direct object pronouns in Russian, having the same questions. When you think about it, Russian doesn't necessarily have the directness of pronouns. Russian simply has a grammatical case that will already answer the questions what and whom, which is why the case automatically identifies an object pronoun as direct. The accusative in Russian answers what and whom, which immediately signifies that it works with direct object pronouns when compared to English, because direct object pronouns in English also answer what and whom. It also goes to show that the accusative works with animate and inanimate objects, which in itself corresponds to object pronouns. Long story short, Russian doesn't necessarily have direct object pronouns, it has object pronouns that answer what and whom using a case. But when compared to English, it's possible to redefine them as direct object pronouns in the accusative. Now, let me explain indirect object pronouns. English has indirect object pronouns that formally receive direct objects, and they can also answer the questions to what and to whom. Essentially, English requires that indirect objects work with direct objects because without them, there is no sense of directness or indirectness. Typically, you'll find indirect objects in a sentence like, he gives it to Emma, with it being direct and to Emma being indirect. To Emma can be replaced with to her or simply her. He gives it to her or he gives her it. In this case, the indirect object pronoun answers to whom. He gives it to whom. He gives it to her or he gives her it. Now that I've just said that answering to what and to whom can help identify indirect object pronouns, which Russian case answers the questions to what and to whom? It is the dative case. Russian has the dative case which answers to what and to whom. Because English indirect object pronouns can work by asking to what and to whom, the dative case is responsible for indirect object pronouns in Russian. Just like directness, Russian doesn't necessarily have indirectness of pronouns. Russian has a case that will already answer the questions to what and to whom, which is why the case automatically identifies an object pronoun as indirect. The dative in Russian answers to what and to whom, which immediately signifies that it works with indirect object pronouns when compared to English. Long story short, Russian doesn't necessarily have indirect object pronouns, it has object pronouns that answer to what and to whom using a case. But when compared to English, we can redefine them as indirect object pronouns in the dative. This is why it's important to understand the meaning of cases before jumping into object pronouns. That's why I explained this concept in the beginning, so that later, object pronouns are easier to understand. The accusative works with animate and inanimate objects, so it's safe to say that it works with direct object pronouns because it answers what and whom, the same questions that English answers. The dative works with direction, and this is very important because the direction will always ask to what and to whom. These are the questions that the dative answers, which in English correspond with indirect object pronouns, to what and to whom. I really hope that you can see a pattern here, which is what I meant when I said that object pronouns, both in English and Russian, have the same principle. With that being said, we can finally look at what object pronouns look like in Russian, considering that we know their use. This is what object pronouns in Russian look like in the 6 cases. In the nominative, the pronouns are я, I, ты, you, он, he, она, she, мы, we, вы, y'all, and oni, they. There's also the pronoun ono, which means it. And even though we don't see it on the chart, it has the same pattern as the pronoun on, so we don't have to worry about it. In the accusative, the pronouns are меня, me, тебя, you, его, him, ее, her, нас, us, вас, y'all, and ich, them. In this case, the pronouns его, ее, and ich have the same grammar as with possessive pronouns, but do not confuse them. Now, starting from the dative onward, because the 6 Russian cases ask questions with different prepositions, such as of from what and of from whom, each object pronoun will be defined with the preposition that's related to the case. In the dative, the pronouns are мне, literally meaning to me, тебе, literally meaning to you, ему, to him, ей, to her, нам, to us, вам, to y'all, and im, to them. In the genitive, the pattern is borrowed from the accusative, which is something that you commonly see in object pronouns in Russian. Still, do not confuse them just because it's a different case. In the genitive, меня would mean of or from me. Тебя would be of or from you, and so on. In the instrumental, the pronouns are mной with me, тобой with you, им with him, ей with her, nami with us, vami with y'all, and ими with them. In the prepositional, the pronouns are мне in on about me, тебе in on about you, нем him, ней her, нас us, вас y'all, and них them. Before showing examples in every case, there are a few things to know about these object pronouns. First, the nominative is highlighted because these pronouns are the main personal pronouns in English. They're written in the dictionary form, which is the nominative. Second, the accusative and dative are marked because they go back on what I said about direct and indirect object pronouns. When compared to English, the accusative answers what and whom, which works with direct object pronouns, and the dative answers to what and to whom, working with indirect object pronouns. That's the reason why they're marked. Third, object pronouns in Russian are not that hard to remember because some cases tend to borrow the same words grammatically. Fourth, and this is a spelling rule, the pronouns on, ona, and oni receive the consonant n if there's any type of preposition before it, and this rule applies in the dative, genitive, instrumental, and prepositional. От него, from him, от нее, from her, от них, from them. К нему, to him, к ней, to her, к ним, to them. С ним, with him, с ней, with her, and с ними, with them. Now, because the prepositional obviously works with prepositions, the consonant n is automatically placed in those pronouns, which is why you immediately see it in the prepositional, but not in the genitive, dative, or instrumental. Still, watch out for this rule. The last thing to know about object pronouns, and this is something for the next video, is that due to some cases, Russian uses these object pronouns in correlation to complex sentence structures. It's something known as impersonal speech and possessive constructions. Russian commonly uses impersonal speech to express feelings or the state of something, which happens when a person or thing is affected in the dative, because some of the functions of the dative are emotional and physical states, conjunction with verbs, addressing, age, and some prepositions. For instance, the dative has the pronoun мне, which literally means to me. And in Russian, we can say мне нравится and мне холодно. Some educators would say that this means I like and I'm cold. But visually, it connects more to me it's pleasing and to me it's cold. This speech is impersonal, which puts verbs in the reflexive form because they're expressed without an object in the sentence. This is simply a grammatical feature of Russian because the dative is used, so there may or may not be an object. The same thing could be said about a possessive construction using the genitive. For instance, in English, we use the verb to have to show that we possess something, like I have a dog. Russian completely doesn't have the verb to have, so it relies on a possessive construction using an object pronoun from the genitive, like у меня есть собака. Some would say that this phrase means I have a dog, but constructively, it's more like by me there is a dog. The same thing can be done with a phrase like его тут нет. It doesn't necessarily mean he's not here as much as of him none is here. Russian does that because there's a reason in culture for using existential clauses to indicate possession. All of this is something that I'll explain in the next video, which is why it's important to understand object pronouns first so that future concepts will be understood much better. Now, let's finally jump into some examples. Here, we have object pronouns in the nominative, and because the nominative is the dictionary form, these examples are the easiest. Я, I, ты, you, он, he, она, she, мы, we, вы, y'all, and oni, they. Here, we have object pronouns in the accusative, and when compared to English, they answer what and whom and work with objects. So in this case, all object pronouns are direct. Also, considering that the accusative works with animate and inanimate objects, personal object pronouns are all animate by default, because persons, or people, are all animate, which is why there is no separation of inanimate objects. The following phrases are also very easy to understand. Адам видит меня. Адам видит тебя. Адам видит его. Адам видит ее. Адам видит нас. Адам видит вас. And Adam видит их. Here we have object pronouns in the dative. Адам дает мне. Адам дает тебе. Адам дает ему. Адам дает ей. Адам дает нам. Adam дает вам. And Adam дает им. When compared to English, the dative answers to what and to whom. So in this case, all object pronouns are indirect. Now, because Russian doesn't necessarily have directness or indirectness of object pronouns, you don't need the other case to rely on the first one. Here's what I mean. In English, we can say, he sees me and he gives me. Me in the first phrase is direct, because by asking whom, we have an answer. He sees whom? He sees me. Me in the second phrase is indirect, because by asking to whom, we have an answer. He gives to whom? He gives to me or me. Typically, it's not formal to say he gives me. We usually complete the sentence by accompanying something direct, like he gives it to me. Me is now to me as opposed to he gives me it. It just so happens that English can rewrite the sentence, but conversationally, we can leave it out and me will still be indirect. Now, we can take this concept and finish all of these sentences in Russian by simply adding a direct object pronoun, like it, which in Russian is simply это. Adam дает мне это. Adam gives me it. Adam дает тебе это. Adam gives you it. Adam дает ему это, and so on. The object pronouns мне and me, both in Russian and English, are still indirect, because they both answer the questions to what and to whom, and the same applies to the rest of the pronouns. In Russian, it's automatically shown using a case that answers the question, and in English, it's the rule for indirect object pronouns. You can just see that Russian does the same thing, but in cases. What makes English different than Russian is that the grammar for direct and indirect object pronouns is literally the same. In Russian, it's different, which is why it's easy to distinguish directness from indirectness. One, because the grammar is different, and two, Russian has cases, like the accusative and dative, which answer specific questions, automatically letting us know what specific pronouns will fall into what case. Speaking of specific pronouns, we can confirm that the dative is in fact the dative by applying a preposition. Just like in English, he gives me it can be rewritten as he gives it to me. But in Russian, we don't need the preposition because we automatically know that the dative already answers to what and to whom. However, we can provide simpler sentences that will have a preposition, so that way we can guarantee that it's the dative and avoid complications on the way. Адам идет ко мне. Адам идет к тебе. Адам идет к нему. Адам идет к ней. Адам идет к нам. Адам идет к вам. And Adam идет к ним. In the first phrase, к changes to ko, and it's a simple spelling rule. Don't worry too much about that. In these sentences, we're using the same dative grammar, but this time we have a preposition, so we know it's the dative without any complication. The only change is that we're adding the consonant n to ему, ей, and им, because it's a spelling rule. Don't forget that the same idea applies to the genitive and instrumental. And starting from now, the rest of the examples will have prepositions and minor changes in the on, ona, and oni pronouns. Here, we have object pronouns in the genitive with the same accusative grammar. Still, there is a big difference because the genitive answers of from what and of from whom, as opposed to simply what and whom. In this case, we're using a preposition with the genitive. Адам уходит от меня. Адам уходит от тебя. Адам уходит от него. Адам уходит от нее. Адам уходит от нас. Адам уходит от вас. And Adam уходит от них. The consonant N is added to его, ее, and их because there's a preposition before. As a side note, уходит comes from the verb уходить, which in itself comes from the verb ходить, meaning to walk or to go. Ходить means to walk or go, and уходить means to walk or go away. That's the meaning behind that. Here, we have object pronouns in the instrumental, again using a preposition and having minor changes in the on, она, and они pronouns. Адам ходит со мной. Адам ходит с тобой. Адам ходит с ним. Адам ходит с ней. Адам ходит с нами. Адам ходит с вами. And Adam ходит с ними. The consonant N is added to im, ей, and imi because there's a preposition before. In the first sentence, se changes to so, and it's a simple spelling rule. Finally, we have object pronouns in the prepositional. The prepositional obviously works with prepositions, so automatically the consonant N will be placed in the on, она, and они pronouns. Адам говорит обо мне. Адам говорит о тебе. Адам говорит о нем. Адам говорит о ней. Адам говорит о нас. Adam говорит о вас. And Adam говорит о них. In the first sentence, o changes to obo, and it's a simple spelling rule. In conclusion, this is the primary usage and understanding of object pronouns in Russian. In the next video, I'll show more sophisticated sentences of object pronouns that are required for such concepts. The next video will explain possessive constructions in impersonal speech. That's why it's important to show them now so that future concepts will be understood much better. Additionally, more explanations of the 6 Russian cases will be shown to elaborate more on object pronouns and how they function in each Russian case.